Good morning. I'm John Steen. Earlier, I heard Dr. Murdoch observe that there weren't many people in this audience under 35. So I want to ask you a question. How many grandparents are here? Raise your hand. So I've got 3 granddaughters. I'll tell you something that happened to me last week. Out of nowhere, one of my granddaughters told me, she said, "Granddaddy, you and God are alike." And so I thought, wow, that's, and I was just mentally polishing my halo. And I should have just left well enough alone, because I asked her, I said, okay, how are Granddaddy and God alike? You know what she said? She said, "You're both old." All right, I want to state the completion goal that I'm dealing with, and that is that by 2030, at least 550,000 students in that year will complete a certificate, associate, bachelor's or master's from an institution of higher education in Texas. And here's a brief overview of that goal. The completion goal in the new Texas Higher Education Plan complements the overarching 60 by 30 goal by supplying graduates of all ages from all 2- and 4-year institutions of higher education in Texas. The state will need to continue the degree production increases of recent years to reach this goal, with large increases required among targeted groups. Growth in certificates and degrees among 2- and 4-year colleges is critical for reaching the overarching 60% goal and educating a skilled workforce, but is only part of the solution for reaching that goal. So the panelists that I'm going to introduce will consider methods and best practices for helping students achieve a degree. And I think the format here is I'm going to do a brief introduction. You have their bios and your materials, but I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists, and then I think each of you will address the audience for 10 minutes. So I want to begin with Danifu Elston, PhD. He serves as Complete College America's Vice President for Alliance State Relations. Over 2 decades of his higher education career in academic and student affairs, Elston has created and implemented comprehensive success and retention programs that have garnered national attention. He has been recognized as an expert in college completion policy initiatives at institutions that educate highly diverse and unrepresented student populations. Dr. Elston earned a PhD in Educational Policy Studies from Georgia State University, and he earned both an MA in Educational Leadership and a BS in Biology from Clark Atlanta University. So that's our first speaker. And then next we have Dr. Linda Baer, and she's a senior fellow with Civitas Learning. She has served over 30 years in numerous executive level positions in higher education. Her ongoing focus is to inspire leaders to improve student success and transform institutions for the future. Her recent publications have been on smart change, shared leadership, innovations in higher education, and analytics as a tool to improve student success. She earned a bachelor's degree in sociology from Washington State University, a master's in sociology from Colorado State University, and her PhD in sociology from South Dakota State University. So having introduced them, let me first call forward Dr. Elston.
Thank you. Okay, well, first of all, welcome, and thank you very much for the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you. As you well know, Texas is one of the members of the Complete College America Alliance of States. My name is Danifu Elston, and what I get a chance to do on a almost daily and weekly basis is get a chance to work with our member states on moving from just framing the conversation to getting on the ground and talking about how do we implement these various strategies that help so many more students. And so I'm going to run through a few things with you. Many of them you already know, so some of them I might run through kind of quick, and then we'll talk a little more. On a very personal level, I have a daughter that is a junior at Texas State University, and so I got a chance to have dinner with her last night. So if any of you see her on campus, make sure she's doing what she's supposed to do. And this is what we do. We are really working on increasing the numbers of certificates and closing attainment gaps. And this is what our alliance looks like. In the past week, New Hampshire and Virginia have become members of our alliance of states. We also have a consortium in California, and so that map is progressively getting more full with states that have made a commitment to work on college completion. And our president, Stan Jones, who really started this organization, Texas became a member, was one of our first members in early 2010. This was really the impetus for this national work, moving from just access to this concept of completion. And what we found out was that out of 550 plus public four-year institutions, only 50 of them were graduating half of their students. And that was something that we knew we had to do something about. And so we've produced a number of different publications over the past few years. Our most recent one is called the FourYear Myth. And we call it the FourYear Myth because every student at a four-year institution normally goes in saying, I want to get a four-year degree. But what we found out was that not many students were graduating in 4 years. They were actually taking quite a bit more time. No student and their parents says, I want to graduate in 5.7 years. And so what we found out was something that looks like this. IPES looks at 150% graduation rate. So at 2-year institutions, that's 3 years, or 4-year institutions, that's 6 years. But when we looked at on-time graduation rates, those numbers looked something like this. And what we also found over the years is that remediation was really a bridge to nowhere. We found that if students, and the vast majority of students, over 60% in our country, were starting in some form of remediation, less than 1 in 10 of those students graduated. And so when you look at Texas, you know this data. The data in Texas looks very similar to some of our other states as far as on-time graduation rates. And then when you start thinking about excess credit, so at a 2-year institution, when you should graduate at 60 credit hours, it's a little higher. For 4-year institutions, at non-flagship institutions, students are accumulating a lot of hours. And the time to degree, as I just mentioned, looks somewhat like this. So at 2-year institutions, on average, 3.4 years to graduate. And at 4-year institutions, 5.5, and at flagships, around the same. And that has a huge implication for the economic viability of our states and our workforce demands. And so, normally we talk about tuition and fees, but when you add on books and travel and other expenses, those numbers become quite large. And if a student has to take an additional year or two to finish, now you've got an additional debt that comes along with that, and you also miss out on those gains, whereas if they had been in the workforce, they would be contributing in a different kind of way. So what we came up with is we know that if we sat down and talked, we could come up with 100 different ideas of why students don't persist and why they don't ultimately complete. At Complete College America, we laser focused on 5 key strategies, which we refer to as our game changers. And I'll run through them very quickly. And they're listed right here. So the first one is performance-based funding. We know that in Texas, that has been done on some level with our community college systems. For us, when we look at performance-based funding, it's really knowing that data drives the change. And it becomes the catalyst to really move forward on some things that have been challenging in higher education for a while. We would encourage you to continue to have that conversation because although it's been implemented in Texas at the 2 years, there's still some room to kind of talk about setting that framework at the 4-year institutions. Our second game changer, Corequisite Remediation. So many of you think of and know the idea of prerequisites. And so with so many students entering into remediation, we know they have to take this course before they can take this course, before they can take this course, before they can even get to a gateway course. And many students aren't getting to that gateway course. And so across the country, that co-requisite model looks a little bit like this, and so depending on what institution you are, it may look different, but really it's a way to get students into a co-requisite model where they get a chance to get additional academic support. And what we found is most of those students are able to complete that gateway course in 1 semester versus the 2 or 3 that's previously been stated. And as a part of co-requisite, we have to look at math pathways. Many of us entered in college looking at college algebra as the path. It was kind of that weed out course. But what we found in talking to mathematicians is that college algebra leads you to calculus, which is really primarily used if you're going into science, technology, engineering, and math. But what if you're going into business or liberal arts or social sciences? And so looking at math pathways such as quantitative reasoning and statistics, you may, if you're going into STEM, still need to be in algebra and pre-calculus and calculus, but there are a lot of different options for students, and we need to review those different options. And then when we think about placement, where do students start in that remediation? For the past couple years, we've been talking about individual institutions. This is new data when we talk about this idea of scale. This is West Virginia. They decided, you know what, we're going to scale co-requisite remediation in English and math. And these are the results that have just been released from West Virginia. Previously, so they did co-requisite remediation in math and English across all their institutions. Previously, over 2 years, 14% of students were passing the Gateway course. Now, over 62% of their students are passing Gateway courses. And I have examples from Tennessee and a number of other states that are starting to see the same thing. And then people will often say, well, it depends on the students that they saw. Who was in that remediation? Even as you look at ACT scores, the students that did best in remediation or co-requisite model were those students that had the lowest level of ACT scores all the way up to the higher ranges. So it seems to work for the vast majority of students. Our next game changer is GPS. And so this idea is thinking about your phone. You know, when you decide to go somewhere, you're on the direct route. Unfortunately, for many of our students, they aren't put on that direct route. And for many of our advisors and counselors, they have these wide loads and can't manage all of those students that they're required to see to get them on that direct route. So the components of a GPS really look like this. First, there has to be some conversations about where is it that you want to go, what is it that you want to do, and how is your major in alignment with that interest. It includes academic maps. I know that you guys have talked about this. Clearly defined process for how students get to that 2-year degree or that 4-year degree, semester by semester, on time. And once we get those maps and for those students that are undeclared, maybe identifying meta majors in larger buckets. Sometimes students say, I'm undeclared, but they really know they want to do something in the health sciences or maybe in business. And so helping them understand and move in that direction is also a key piece of that. And once we identify those maps or those meta majors, we have to put students on the map. It's like that GPS. It doesn't just say, where do you want to go? You know what I'm saying? You have to say, I want the most direct route, and it gets you there. We have to put students on that map as a default. And then once they're on that map, as I do sometimes, I make a left when I should have made a right, there has to be someone with some guardrails. And there has to be a person that says, you are being rerouted. And making sure, and normally those are our advisors. And some people say they don't like the term intrusive advisement. You could call it proactive advisement. I don't care what you call it. For me, when I pay that tuition check, if my daughter is taking a class that's going to prevent her from graduating on time, I would love for one of you to intrude, okay? And where we've seen this work is Georgia State University is a good example. They've pretty much eliminated the attainment gap and the completion gap by focusing on degree maps and intrusive advising. Last game changer, or actually the second to last game changer, structured schedules. I know this is happening in the community colleges. There's legislation that's recently been passed, and it's the idea of putting students in a map or a system that allows them to have predictability in when they go to school. So for many of our junior college students, many of them have to work. And so providing some level of predictability, whether it's morning blocks or afternoon blocks of schedules, is very helpful for them. And in Tennessee, they did this. And where there's structure, there are significant results. And so their normal community colleges have about a 14% on-time graduation rate. Through this type of structured schedule, about 75% in their programs are now passing. And last but not least, 15 to finish. We have to help students understand what it takes to graduate on time. And we know that that's part of academic maps and everything else. The more students are on the path early on, the more likely they'll graduate. And what we know is that most students at 2-year and 4-year institutions are not enrolled in 15 credit hours. And in most cases, it's because they don't know that's what it takes. I've worked on college campuses for a number of years. I decided to put it to a test. I was at an institution, 68% first-generation college students. I said, show of hands, how many of you plan to take more than 12 credit hours? Maybe a tenth of the room raised their hand. And then I asked, how many of you plan to graduate in 4 years? Everybody raised their hand. And there was a clear definition right there that just by changing behaviors and sharing information was a good step. And so this is what that looked like. This was when I had that conversation in 2012. 2 years later, 66% of students, almost a 40% point increase of students taking 15 credit hours in their first semester. And that was just by changing our language. These game changers, the work that you're doing is very deeply entrenched in the 60 by 30 program and by the initiative. And we are proud to have been a part of it. There are some great things that are happening in Texas. We're working with Houston schools on a GPS system. We've been working with a number of institutions on the structured schedule legislation, and we want to continue to work with you as a partner. So we're proud of the work that you're doing. We put up a lot of numbers. Ultimately, this is always about our students, and this is what Complete College America wants to continue to work with you on. So thank you very much.
Well, good morning. I'm Linda Bear. I like to claim at least that my son was born in Texas. We were at Fort Hood, so he was born in Killeen, Texas. Since then, we've done a number of things in terms of moving around the country, but I've spent most of my time in the state of Minnesota. I want to applaud the outstanding work you're doing in Texas. The first thing about getting action going in an issue like this is intentionality. And your leaders, your campuses have claimed this issue and have determined in an intentional way you're going to move forward. And so that's number one. Number two, it's really going to take partnerships and collaborations. And so even from the conversations you've already been having, but it is going to take a lot more work and a lot more data that I'm going to talk about a little more this morning. The issue is you have done well about increasing the number of people coming into your doors, particularly community colleges. They have met the access mission and then some. So more and more students have been coming in, but what we realized was the access mission wasn't enough. We need a success mission. You can't just have them come in and then drop them. You know, I say, you admitted them, you took their money, we should be providing a pathway that leads to success for them as students. So that's the second piece. The third piece is making sure that we get into the K-12 system to build out our pipeline better. Because part of the issue of kind of having stagnant, persistent graduation rates is we keep taking more in, but we haven't figured out, are they ready enough to be there? Are they ready enough to be there? And sometimes that takes a state figuring out that your high school graduation requirements must better align with college attendance, even community college attendance. And that's a little hard for us in community college land because we're so access oriented, right? Oh, just come with your GED even, or we'll help you with a GED. Instead of, you've got to have some particular courses to make sure you can be successful. Particular preparation in high school that you can be successful in the community college, and particularly then if you're going to transfer. The last thing I'm going to talk about, which I'm going to focus more on, has to do with the data and the analytics. So you've been inundated with a lot of data here. What I'm going to call that data is descriptive data, much of it exactly in a reportable format so that you can understand the past, to better understand your present, to better plan for your future. But let's talk a little more about what that means next. Data are changing everything. So we're in a big world. How many of you might order from Amazon and they say, readers like you might like books like this? Did you ever wonder, how did they know that? Oh, I got a coupon once in the grocery store and they go, you know, here are 3 coupons for you. And I go, where'd those coupons come from? Are they reading what I'm doing, you know, at the grocery store even? Well, they might be. But certainly Amazon has built out this huge consumerism through the algorithms of behavior that you're doing in your book purchasing. And then because they've got millions of data points, they can project, you might also like this. Now, I think it's kind of, if I read this kind of book, they're going to put up the same kind of books or even the same author. What about that? But I might be buying for my grandkids, I might be buying for business and work, I might be also buying for leisure, and they got to keep track of all that stuff. Well, other consumerism is going on. I mean, you're being barraged every day, whether you know it or not, about not just what you want and what you need, but what they're anticipating you should be buying, and so they're tailoring it to that. What if we had a system that could say, students like you in this position, junior in high school aspiring to be a nurse, students like you can more likely be successful if, or students like you that are successful in nursing at the junior level of high school are taking these kind of courses or taking summer bridge camp or something like that to help them be more successful. Well, data are changing everything. Now, higher ed has been a little slow to pick up on this, right? A little slow to pick up anything past lots of reporting. They are not big into analytics at this point, but it's coming on the scene, and many of your campuses are now picking up on the descriptive data to the next level of data. I like to say the future's here, it's just not evenly distributed. I was trained as a demographer. It was really nice to hear Steve because he's one of my heroes. And I used his material when I was teaching, but we used to say demography is destiny. And I sometimes thought, oh, what does that really mean? The numbers are already there, folks. Your population is there, and it's not who will be born. They're here, they're moving through the pathway. What are you going to do about it? So the future is here, it's not evenly distributed. The technology is here, it's not evenly distributed in how we can improve student success. So you as trustees and people on campuses and people at the Higher Education Coordinating Board understand some of the right questions. You've been hearing them, you've been asking them, they have formed the basis for your wonderful report. Which students are more likely to persist in their program of study? Which applicants are more likely to be successful? Which students are most likely not to complete a particular course? All of those kinds of questions. Which students are at the highest risk of withdrawing? Which students have, and faculty have low online engagement within a course? Those kinds of things might be questions that kind of pass through your mind at one point or another. And basically, if I asked you that question, you'd have to say, I don't know. I don't know who's most likely to succeed. But I will tell you that in your enrollment management work, you're probably getting honed in on the science of enrollment management and have for probably a decade or so. That's one place where higher ed did claim the data and started working with it. Which high schools are more likely to send you successful students, for example? Or which adult learning centers end up working better than others for the adult population? Or which ones work for which segment of the population better? Part of our problem is we've kind of had a one-size-fits-all, and we've had a hard time figuring out that not all students are exactly the same when they come to us, nor are they the same in what some of their learning needs are. So, just to describe a little bit the data, the source of the data, I mentioned you have a lot of descriptive data, 4 levels of data. How about that? Can always tap dance up here a little bit. The descriptive data, which is what you have tons of, it's probably what your IR departments spend 80% of their time doing. Reporting to the board, reporting to the legislature, reporting to the chancellor, reporting to a committee, whatever. That's the descriptive level of data. How many entered? How many went into which majors? How many persisted term to term? How many graduated? Those are some of those descriptive things. You didn't get anything about why. Now, the next level is analysis. So you start looking at, as I mentioned, which high schools tend to send the students that are most likely to be successful. In Minnesota, the University of Minnesota and the Minnesota State College University System campuses put together a report. How many students come from which high schools that need remediation? Kind of a nice thing to know. And then the school superintendents get that report, and hopefully campuses and schools start talking more about what's going on in this picture. But what happens with that analysis? That took it to the next level. It analyzed which high schools were sending students that were more likely to be successful or less likely to be successful. Now, often it was that math course or two that ended up being the gatekeeper for them. The third level, when you see it, when you pull up my slides, and of course you will, the third level helps you get to a more transformative level, and it's the predictive level. It's the level that starts saying more like, what will happen next? If we do nothing else in Texas, if we didn't have 60 by 30 Texas, you saw the writing on the wall, and you have claimed it, both with your closing the gap in 2000, but now the 60 by 30, by being intentional. You understand the relationship between educational attainment and economic well-being for your state and your communities and your individual citizens. You also know you want to be highly competitive. And so what do you do next? If those high schools continue to send you students that aren't ready or that need developmental, why aren't you getting your faculty at the college or university to talk with the teachers in English and math, which I did when I was at Bemidji State University in northern Minnesota, with more or less success, by the way, because I had a school superintendent say to me, well, not everybody is going to go to college, Linda, so stop working on this so hard. And I said, well, by the words that you're even saying here, that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what will happen next, and how are you going to intervene? And I'm going to talk about intervention science a little bit, which leads to the fourth category that you'll see, which is called prescriptive. If we prescribe something, you have an ailment that the doctor has said you have, and they prescribe something to improve your condition. We now, with Student Success Science, can prescribe certain interventions. Now, each of you representing a college or a university out there, I would challenge you to go back and list all the interventions you have going on your campus. That is tutoring, learning communities, early alert systems. I'd also have you do a parallel list of what tools have you purchased and how are they improving what's going on with your students. Because what I found on the ground, on campuses, is there could be 60 to 80 interventions out there, 60 to 80, and student affairs probably doesn't know what academic affairs is doing, and they probably haven't informed IT or institutional research what's going on much. We still operate in these silos. This happens to be an example of a university that listed the kinds of initiatives, the student success initiatives they had going on. And I use this simply for you to see some of the categories. What are you intentionally doing about building a better pipeline? What are you intentionally doing about successful transitions? Students just don't walk in the door and know what to do. We don't know what to do. In fact, we used to have trustees, when we would hold trustee meetings on campus, do half a day following a student around. They were issued a backpack, and they walked around. Now, just walking around for a day doesn't give you exactly what this means, but what are you doing with the high school to college transition? What are you doing about transfer transitions? What are you doing about veterans transitions? Each of these are major life events that you can improve upon the ultimate success if you think deeply about what is that individual going through. Other things, intervention with specific populations, got a lot going on with STEM. You probably have some great foundation money and grant money to help you improve STEM, but what you do for STEM, you can be doing for others. And I always point to TRIO programs because I believe that federal program has some of the best work going on pre-computer stuff to today, including early alert and intrusive advising. Academic initiatives, we do a lot with course redesign, a lot of data on redesigning math. They're just not getting it. Well, let's redesign it some more. And I would applaud CCA's work in terms of what does it really take? What math do you really need to be the business major versus the engineer? Because sometimes we think everybody needed the same entree. We have redesigned calculus over and over again, and we're still not necessarily getting any more success. And then some of the academic support stuff. Well, where to focus? I'm going to talk to you a little bit about individualizing completion. I would say the work that Complete College America is doing and the work that you have targeted does a very good job at institutional levels. Institution, improve your retention rates by doing 1, 2, 3. And all of you had to have plans to come back about how were you going to meet your targets. I am saying there's the next level to take you to the next level of accomplishment, which I would call either individualized or personalized completion, which says start understanding more what's going on with student success science, intervention science, that is which interventions you have, and do you know what kind of success you're getting from them? Shouldn't be too hard to say, this many students went into the program, this many people succeeded, and it costs this much for us to do the program. The student learning cycle, clear differences when the student enters first year throughout their learning cycle. Grand Valley State University did a very nice student blueprint for success. Blueprint for student success, Grand Valley State University. And they said, here's what we do in the first year. Well, most of you do a ton of stuff the first year because you want to make sure they get through the first year. And then we kind of stop the efforts the sophomore or junior, senior year, when really there are transitions still going on, transition from general education or university core to major, for example, or major to work, which is the next level. You need to make sure we've got people more involved in apprenticeships and internships and being ready for the work we want them to be ready for. There are other things here. There's not going to be time to talk about all of them, but you can see them in the presentation. A lot to do with defining your metrics. Now, those descriptive data are the right place to start. How many here, in which category, even by segments of populations. But they're lagging indicators. Once somebody reports to you what the persistent was term to term, or once somebody reports to you a graduation rate, it's done. You don't go back and help the student that didn't graduate, necessarily. You're getting data that already happened. It's in the rearview mirror. What you need to do is know the intermediate metrics that can help you move farther along, like milestones. Did students accomplish 15 credits? Celebrate it. Yay, you got their 15 credits. That's important for them. They got to know you did something really significant. El Paso, where's El Paso out there? There you are, okay. El Paso, Community College and University of Texas, El Paso did this cool thing where once a student hit the 60 credits that equaled an associate degree, they called up El Paso Community College and awarded the degree. The student didn't have to apply, the student didn't have to pay more. You're saying you accomplished 60 credits, it's important to have that credential. It's awarded. Go forth and be happy. Because once you looked at what those completion rates were, wasn't it better if you got through 60 plus that equaled the AA, that you were holding the AA, than getting through your junior year and suddenly dropping out and not having much to show for it? Cool, good, that's a great program. All right, let's look just a little bit at intervention science. I know I'm kind of babbling on here now, okay. What is that intervention science? Well, I said you start with your inventory of interventions. How many? For how many students? But here's the interesting thing, the return on investment. So I talk about Hilda's project. So I've been in meetings and somebody talked to me and they said, you know, we've got this project and this intervention, the student affairs intervention. And I said, really? And yeah, we call it Hilda's project. And I said, well, that's nice. What does it look like? Well, you know, it's been there for 15 years, but, well, Hilda retired 5 years ago. And we don't really know what's happening anymore, but we're still funding Hilda's project. Well, why didn't you cut out Hilda's project when Hilda retired? Well, maybe, you know, maybe it's tradition, you know, or sometimes we say, well, it's for our cultural diversity. I had a lot of people that argue, just because it was cultural diversity, you had to do it instead of you had to show what your results might be. So take a look at some of the things we're finding to be especially important, which parallel Complete College America. Accelerated modularized developmental ed. Google that long term, and it happens that Gates Foundation has done some significant work in that area to help figure out what's working better in developmental ed than the stuff we have been doing, somewhat like what Complete College America's aligned to. Competency-based education. You have some that are exploring that. We've got some strong pioneers out in the country that have had to do the battle with accreditors about competency-based education. Unbundling education into bites that you can say, you did accomplish this. Now, why is that important? We have found in the research with Civitas that sometimes students get C's, they keep moving through their major, but they don't complete. In fact, they drop out. And it may not be till the junior or senior year. Something significant happened in a critical course that they didn't get all the competencies they needed, but you don't know what they missed necessarily the way we do education right now. And so they thought they were okay because a C is okay. We're beginning to find is that a C is not good enough. A C is not good enough. You want a C level this doing, work for you, not necessarily. So there's some research on how to improve from a C level to a B level work or B level to A level work. Well, lots going on here. I have other things that are on here, but I'm going to keep going. What we ultimately can now do futuristically, but the future's here, are some things like this predictive modeling. So one of the things we found was the real difficulty in late registration. Late registration is a high predictor of non-persistence no matter what. And you say, we do late registration because we get seats in and it's an access thing and we want to make sure everybody gets somewhere. Well, they're not getting in the right things and they're failing. But you know what our research found was 30 days before registration was equally predictive of non-persistence. What did that reflect? They're not getting the right courses when they're in the last group of registrants. So you've got to make sure the right courses are there for all students, not just, some people think, oh, that was just a student that walked off the street and came. No, these are students that were in the pipeline and just had the ill fortune of being one of the last to register. So think about the whole thing that's going on. One of the cool things, I just want to leave you with this interesting picture, but this is an application we happen to be developing at Civitas, but it looks like some of the things you're seeing in some of your tool sets. But it helps the student because ultimately the bottom line is we need to empower the student to be a more engaged learner. This gives a dashboard for the student and everybody else to look at key indicators that are important to their success, like attendance matters, timeliness matters. They set goals and work toward them. Class interaction matters. All of these are based on learning theory. Focus matters, and even if you're into doing badges, and some populations like badges, you can do that. We're looking at something like a fitness app, a Fitbit for education. Think about that. Think about that possibility. When you're supposed to be doing 10,000 steps, did you do, the 3 assignments? So I know we've got to move on, and I will just finish up because I did give you a paper called The Call to Action. You can read that. You're really on track with that, and it will help you continue to move forward. So thanks very much.
Are you